I've wanted to make this video for a while. I built a large rock garden in my front yard in 2013. From April until October, it's lush, full of many types of flowers and plants, and best of all, doesn't require me to water it. I've enjoyed this garden greatly. So I'm going to describe how I built the garden with a special focus on the rock work, which is what most people find intimidating. In fact, the hardscape was a real highlight. When it comes to the actual plants, I'm hardly an expert, so I'm going to leave it to you. I don't really say much about which plants to choose or how to take care of them. The plants I have don't require any water, so I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and I'll respond quickly. So without further ado, let's get going. Here's a cross-section view of my front yard. So over a distance of about 50 feet or 15 meters, the slope of the grass dropped from the house to the street by about 5 feet or 1.5 meters. The slope was really useful because it allowed me to get a well-drained garden without too much work. Your typical rock garden plant likes well-drained soil. The first step is to remove the grass. Personally, I like to dig it up and then bury it at least 1 foot or 30 centimeters deep. In fact, I have an entire video dedicated to grass burial. Check the description for a link. You need to dig deep in order to keep any grass roots or rhizomes from sprouting. You can probably get away with digging only 6 inches deep. Anyway, you'll probably want to build up a berm of good dirt above the level of the grass. If you buy dirt to build the berm, make sure that it's not full of weed seeds. Compost might actually be better. Also, for rock garden plants, you may wish to amend the soil with gravel, since many rock garden plants prefer rocky and well-drained soil. Some people recommend 1/2 to 1/3 gravel to soil ratio, so I'll leave it up to you. I added a blank slide for irrigation. So if you're going to install buried irrigation, now's the time to do it before you lay any rocks down. So that's what I did. And I use the irrigation for the first couple of years, especially in the first few months when the plants really need water, even if they are xeric plants. You could install drip irrigation. Personally, I hate drip irrigation and find it tedious and unreliable. Or you could simply hand water your plants in the first season, which might be okay for a small garden. For the last 5 years, I didn't use the irrigation in my rock garden at all. That saved me hundreds of dollars in water bills and probably suppressed the weeds. If you have some irrigation questions, post them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Buying the rocks can seem like the most intimidating part, but it's really pretty easy. In the Denver, Colorado area, there are many companies that sell raw quarried stone. My favorite is High Plains stone. I like the moss rocks. These are actually sandstone with lichens. I think they look pretty nice and more natural than raw quarried stone. I like rocks that are generally flat in shape because we're essentially building a wall. Weight is a key consideration. So just looking at these rocks, I can tell you that the largest ones will weigh 100 pounds or more. I'm a pretty big guy, so I can handle a 100-pound rock. If you can't, then you need to find rocks that are smaller. Or you can easily break them apart on the pallet and reassemble them on the ground. In fact, I often do that to make rocks look more realistic on the ground, so more on that later. A pallet of these rocks weighs about 2 tons, which is 4,000 pounds or about 1,800 kilos. The cost is pretty reasonable, only $380 a pallet. I believe that I used 4 pallets for my large rock garden. The delivery charges will be fairly significant, probably $150 to $200 per delivery. So if you want to save money, try to order as much rock as you can at one time. I spent a total of about $2,000 on rocks and deliveries over a few years for my rocks. So compared to other home improvements, that's actually pretty cheap. People are actually surprised how cheap the rocks are. The plants are probably as expensive or more expensive than the rocks themselves. So now it's time for the fun part, putting the rocks in the ground. First, for stability, I would recommend angling the rocks at, say, 5 degrees uphill, like I've shown here. That way, if you step on the exposed part of the rock, it'll try to rotate out of the ground. When you angle the rocks, as I've shown here, you'll have more dirt on the backside, holding the rock in place and keeping it from popping out of the ground. When you've just paid all that money for rocks, it seems like a waste to hide any of it under the dirt. But I would advise you not to be stingy. You'll probably want to bury most of the rock. The rocks will be stable for many years if you follow this rule. If you don't, it's likely that frost will heave them out of the ground, and they'll move if you step on them. Weeds will also pop up from below. So now we're looking at the garden from the front. You'll want to choose a side slope angle ahead of time. For most people, this angle will be 0. But whatever you choose, try to keep it consistent for the entire rock garden if you want your rock layers to look natural. Here I've built the first row of rocks. The edges terminate into the existing grass. I can offer you 2 important hints at this stage. First, choose rocks of a consistent thickness for each layer. Second, choose rocks of a consistent color. Here's a view of the famous road cut west of Denver, Colorado on Interstate 70. The road was carved through a dipping section of sedimentary rocks. Within each geologic layer, the rocks have a similar character and thickness. So this is the natural look that I'm going for in my rock gardens. Now I've added a second layer of lighter, thicker rocks. Now I've added a third layer. Notice that the third layer is similar in character to the second layer. In nature, it might be a continuation of the same geologic layer with a horizontal crack between them. So when you're able, it can look nice to align the vertical cracks as they kind of resemble vertical fractures which extend some distance in rock layers in nature. So now we're looking at a single rock from the top. So in every pallet, there's going to be rocks that are too big for you to lift. It's easy to break them. All you need is a hammer in most cases. One good whack may do the trick. So in this example, I've broken a rock into 3 pieces. I like to reconstruct the original rock in the garden with spaces between the individual rocks. It looks very realistic. So imagine if you started your rock garden with one gigantic rock, broke it up, and reconstructed it. It would look like a real natural rock layer. So that's what I'm going for here. So instead of fitting the fragments back together like a perfect puzzle, you can make small rotations and chip off some of the edges to create small crevices for a small and delicate rock garden plants. So now we've returned to the side view after adding 8 layers of rocks. As you add multiple levels of rock, the slope will look something like this. So there's one exception to the rule of burying most of the rock into the slope. And you can see that where I've highlighted with the arrow. So in places where you're stacking multiple levels of rock vertically, you don't need to bury the middle layer back into the slope. That's because you'll never step directly on that rock that the arrow is pointing to. So there are building codes that dictate how high you can build a vertical, unreinforced stone wall. Those building codes vary from city to city, so don't the building codes that apply in Denver probably don't apply to you. So do your own research. So in my rock garden, the vertical sections of rock were less than 12 inches, and it was really never a problem. So if there's any question about whether your rock wall is going to violate a building code, just call the city or check the codes. So you might be asking yourself, I've put all these rocks down, now where did all the plants go? So the answer is in planting pockets. So one big reason to install your rocks at an angle is to create some depth for your planting pockets. So if you're planting plants with deep roots, you might want to make sure that the rocks don't extend all the way back. So there's no rock at the base of the planting pocket, as I've kind of shown here with these little triangles. Other small plants may happily grow in a few inches of soil with a big rock at the bottom. It really depends on the plant. So to give you a concrete example of what I mean by planting pocket, here's 3 examples of planting pockets that I've built into my rock garden of varying size. So at the end, you'll probably want to add a top coat of pea gravel or some specialized aggregate such as expanded shale, which is what I used in my rock garden. If you can afford it and don't mind the work, I'd suggest adding at least a couple inches of gravel. It'll help with weed control, and most rock garden plants thrive in this kind of rocky soil. It actually also holds in moisture, which is very key. Personally, I was far too cheap to do this. I barely bought enough expanded shale to even cover my rock garden with a thin coat. It worked out in the end. I have a beautiful rock garden, but I wonder if my more delicate alpine plants would have done better with more gravel. And I would have been, I don't have a weed problem, but I definitely had to pick some weeds, and maybe the weeds would have been easier to control had I put more gravel down. So to wrap up the video, I'm just going to go through in no particular order, go through some pictures of the rock garden throughout the years. So enjoy. If you enjoyed the video or have any questions, please leave a comment in the description. I would love to. I answer the questions really quickly and really love this stuff. So hope you enjoyed it.